Today's guest, as Wendy said, is freelance arts reporter, producer, and musical theater composer Jeff Lunden. He works primarily for NPR and Studio 360. He's also freelance for the Washington Post. And he has profiled numerous musical theater legends, among them George and Ira Gershwin, Jerome Robbins, and Stephen Sondheim. What's great about Jeff and his work is that he brings an equal amount of curiosity and skill to those less recognizable names, whether they are Broadway gypsies, i.e. members of the Broadway chorus, or Repertorio Español, a Spanish language theater that's flourished in New York City. And Jeff recently this spring did a 50th anniversary piece on that as well. His curiosity seems to know no bounds. And one of his signature works was the 50th anniversary piece on West Side Story. If you've not had a chance to listen to it, please go on NPR.org and listen to all 3 parts. It's narrated by Scott Simon, but Scott's beautiful voice is undergirded by the exceptional reporting and writing of Jeff, who was able to comb through 50 years worth of amazing material and tease out anecdotes and examples that we hadn't heard before about a very well-known story and about the creation of West Side Story. So if you haven't listened to it, please do so. In addition to his journalism, Jeff is a Broadway composer. Yeah, he wrote the off-Broadway. We'll just say a musical theater composer. And he wrote the music for the adaptation of Arthur Coppett's Wings, which won the Lucille Lortel Award for Best Musical Theater Off-Broadway in 1994. Other works include adaptations of Huckleberry Finn and The Little Prince. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Lunden.
Well, and as Andrew said, my background actually is theater, and I know there's some people from the Performing Arts School here, and I was, I guess, like some of you, I was a theater kid. I acted and wrote musicals in high school, and this was back in the 70s when Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince were doing their landmark shows, Company and Follies, A Little Night Music, and I was growing up in the Washington, D.C. area, so I would see tours of these shows, or I would come to New York and see the shows on Broadway, and very influenced. And I think by senior year of high school, I was serious enough about musical theater that my writing partner and I, who I'm still writing with, adapted Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis as a musical. I can't say that it entirely worked, but it was certainly ambitious. Anyway, I then went to Oberlin College, where I was an English major with a concentration in theater, but Oberlin, like Purchase, has a conservatory of music, so I was composing music and studying at the conservatory as well, writing, basically contemporary classical music and mostly writing musicals in college. Then when I graduated, I came to New York and I was doing the cliche. I was working as a waiter in a Middle Eastern nightclub in the Village, and it was a very slow Friday night. And I remember it very well because I was sitting in the kitchen. There was hardly anybody out in the restaurant, and I was leafing through the New York Times, and there was a little article about a musical theater graduate program at NYU that was going to be taught by some of the greats of musical theater, and specifically for writers. And I thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. So Monday morning, I called up, and I think they told me I was the first person who had called the musical theater program, and I said, I want to be in. I want to be in. And the next summer, I was part of it. They did a pilot program, and our very first teachers were Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince. And we got to meet in Hal Prince's office with all the 16 Tonys and awards. We might have won more Tonys afterwards. But it was very heady, and over the course of 2.5 years, we studied with all of these greats of musical theater who are still with us, like Leonard Bernstein, like Julie Stein, who wrote Gypsy and Funny, whatever. So it was great, but at the same time I was pursuing this other track, which is when I was in college, I went to the radio station and said, I want to do a weekly show on musical theater. And they were like, great. So, you know, I was spinning discs. At that time, discs were LP records. And when I was at NYU studying, I was listening to WBAI. I don't know if any of you have heard WBAI. It's a community radio station here in Pacifica. And there was this guy who had this radio program about musical theater every week. And one day he said, hey, I'm looking for an assistant. I cannot promise you any money because I don't get any money, but you're going to learn about radio. You're going to learn how to do interviews and how to edit tape. In those days, the tape was a big 10.5-inch reels, and you had to use razor blades to edit the tape. And, you know, you get some free theater tickets and you get some free records and you get some experience. And I thought, well, great. So I applied for that. And it was a wonderful experience because some of the people who we were learning in this NYU program were the people that this host, Paul, was interviewing for this weekly radio program. And it was great. We interviewed this guy named Maurice Levine, who was the head of the 92nd Street Y. And Maurice was, he had this series called Lyrics and Lyricists, where he got these great writers to come in and talk about their craft. And they were wonderful, and they would perform songs and whatever. So he came on the air, we interviewed him live. And afterwards, he and I shared a cab uptown, and he said, so what are you doing? What are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm in this graduate program, and I described how I was studying with all these great writers, thinking he'd be really impressed, and he looked at me, and he kind of had this quizzical look on his face, and he said, you know, when you go to medical school, you come out, you're a doctor. When you go to law school, you come out, you're a lawyer. He said, when you go to art school, you come out, you gotta find a job. And I thought, wow, okay, you know. So here I was training to be a writer in musical theater, but I was thinking, you know, maybe I should take this radio thing seriously too. And at the same time, we got a grant to do 26 half hours nationally. And that really was where things kind of shifted for me. And it's not that I wasn't writing musicals. I was continuing to write. But we did 26 half hours, and that led to a series of documentaries that I did over the next decade, where I was covering like George and Ira Gershwin, which was amazing because I met George Gershwin's sister, who was still alive at the time, who told me about how she and Ira and George went around Paris finding all of the taxi horns that they used for An American in Paris. And I met George Gershwin's date on an opening night of An American in Paris. A woman named Rosamond, who since passed away, but you know, she told me about dating George Gershwin. I did Rodgers and Hammerstein, and I found a lot of people who could sort of tell me about their experiences working with these great artists. And then in 2000, this thing happened. NPR had a series called the NPR 100, which was the 100 most influential pieces of music of the 20th century as we were changing millennia. And they consulted me because they knew I'd done all these documentaries. And they said, would you like to do some on musical theater? And it was the first time that I actually spoke myself on the air, except for when I was in Pacifica or the college radio program. I always was getting celebrity hosts to be the hosts for the various documentaries I did. So I was kind of like, great, and I ended up doing 7 out of the 100. But I also realized that there was nobody in New York that was covering theater or dance or music or performing arts on a full-time basis. Occasionally a reporter would file something, occasionally a host would find, say, a Broadway show that they were interested in, and they would report on it, but there was nobody who was kind of looking at it. And so I started pitching stories to NPR. And I remember literally at the same time I was producing Wings at the Public Theater, I was doing radio documentaries, a 50th birthday piece on Oklahoma, where I met the original Boring and the original Dream Ballet people and everything, Agnes DeMille. Anyway, but what's interesting about it is the stuff that I had learned in musical theater kind of applied to radio, and I thought of, like, say, the 2-hour documentaries as putting on a show. And you have to think about pace and variety, and if you do, say, a 5-minute piece, it's like doing a song. You have to have a start, a middle, and an ending to it. But with everything, you have to write with a kind of concision. Because the thing about working on radio, as opposed to print journalism, is that you're writing for the ear. You know, when you're writing a piece in a newspaper or a magazine, people can stop, they can go back, they can look at it. But in radio, it's a very, you know, you've got your 5 minutes or your 7 minutes, and you have to be concise, you have to be precise, and you have to be really careful that you don't do something that causes the listener to sort of turn away or tune out. So the language has to work that way. It's a little bit like the difference between, say, reading poetry or listening to lyrics. You know, the lyrics, they go by. What I wanted to do is just play you some examples of my work, just about 2-3 minute examples, to show you a little bit of how I approach radio. Because I have a background in the arts, I really like to do stories about process, kind of talk to artists about their intentions. I'm not a critic, and their approach to writing or performing something. And one of the things that I'm looking for is something that utilizes sound in a kind of creative way. I mean, when you're covering, if you're a general assignment reporter and you've got to turn out a story, very often all your story is what we call acts and tracks. That's actualities is what clips are referred to in tracks or the narrative tracks. And you know, it's 3 minutes long and you've got to get it out and you've got to tell the story. But if you're doing the kind of feature I'm doing, you're looking for where can I use sound to help tell the story. So what I want to do here first is play a little bit of a piece that I did just last April going to Sing Sing Correctional Facility, which is a maximum security prison right on the Hudson in Ossining. And Carnegie Hall sponsors a program for prisoners where they learn how to read music, they learn how to play instruments, they become part of an ensemble. Several of them have become composers. And I spent an entire day in Sing Sing, watching these men relate to one another, watching them rehearse because they were giving a concert that evening. And so I tried to, I got 5 or 6 hours of tape there, and then afterwards, a week later, I went to a workshop of men who'd been paroled, who had been part of this program. And I'm happy to say the warden told me that all the people who've been in this program, who've been released, not a single one has gone back. So it tells you a lot about the power of the arts. But, you know, you can kind of close your eyes and just listen, because what I wanted to do was find little pieces of tape, of sound, that would give you a sense of what it's like to be inside Sing Sing.
Let's head about 50 miles north of New York City now to the maximum security prison known as Sing Sing. It's probably not the place you'd expect to find a flourishing music community, but for the past 9 years, it's been home to workshops run by Carnegie Hall. Last Saturday, former inmates performed their music on the hall's main stage. Jeff Lunden has more.
Sing Sing Correctional Facility opened in 1828, and there's still a kind of Victorian severity to it. From the rusty iron bars to the dimly lit corridors where prisoners in drab green jumpsuits are led by guards who now communicate by walkie-talkie. There are 1,600 inmates at Sing Sing, and Deputy Superintendent for Program Services, Leslie Mallon, says the staff is always thinking about the day they'll get released.
Because most of the inmates are going to go home and be your neighbor, be my neighbor at some point. So we take a look at what are some of the things that they need before they go. We have an associate's degree program, a bachelor's degree program, a master's degree program.
And a music program. Twice a month, artists from New York City come to Sing Sing and spend a day giving the 30 inmates enrolled in the Musical Connections program formal training. Before it started 9 years ago, Sing Sing had a music room, but Rob, the Department of Corrections, asks that we don't use any last names or say what brought these men to prison, says there were often fights about who could use the room.
Where we had fragmented fighting groups. Now all these guys are part of this weird cohesive thing where we have to play together, and we're all of a sudden we're doing the instant duet, me and somebody who hates me. But we're communicating musically. How long can we go on hating each other when we're helping each other with the score or sharing a piece of music, and we're all kind of struggling to keep up, with everybody else?
Rob has been on parole for the last year and a half after spending 7 years in Sing Sing. He played just 2 open mics before he went in. Joe had even less experience.
I didn't know what an A flat was. I've heard these terms. I couldn't explain them to you. I didn't know what they sounded like. I didn't know what they meant.
But he's been in the program for 4 years, studying music theory and harmony, and even got to work with opera star Joyce DiDonato.
She definitely opened my eyes to something that I didn't even know I had within myself. After I met Joyce, I started to actually listen to classical music. Because before that, I didn't listen to any classical music.
Now he collects opera scores, and he's writing one of his own.
Let's head about 50 miles north of New York.
Return. So that's one way of using sound to tell a story. Another way that I use it is what I refer to radio as tell and show, where you'll have somebody talking about something, about a section of a play, or a dance movement with a particular piece of music, or writing a particular piece of music, and then I would show it. Now sometimes I would show it after they talk about it, or sometimes we'll mix it underneath so that there's a kind of simultaneous, as the person is getting to the point where they're making, going, oh, well, I do blah, 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 and the score, you hear blah, blah, blah underneath, and that's, that's a great advantage when you're doing radio. Because, if you're doing print, yeah, you can show a little bit of lyric or a little bit of a dialogue, but this really propels you somewhere else. This is an excerpt from the the story I did on Hamilton, because you have to do a story on Hamilton. I did it right before the show opened on Broadway. When Lin-Manuel Miranda was literally working on it and fixing it, and sort of talking to me about how, he had gotten offers to move his show immediately after it opened off Broadway, but he and the other creators decided, no, there's still stuff that we need to work on to make it better. And so he would drop out of the show once a week to watch it and do rewrites. And now he was in previews on Broadway, and he was still rewriting. He said, I just put in 4 lines today. But I did want to get back to the start of the piece and how he got involved. And so this is a tell-in show in the middle of the piece.
Lin-Manuel Miranda has been working on Hamilton for 6 years. It started with him sitting on a beach, reading Ron Chernow's 832-page biography of the country's first Treasury Secretary, and realizing the story sang to him.
I feel like a mosquito that hit an artery. That's how I felt when I read Ron Chernow's book. I just thought, Hamilton's life story contains multitudes, particularly in the way Ron unlocked it, in the way that Hamilton is sort of the proto-American immigrant story, the trauma of his early years, and how that kind of created a crack in the foundation.
For his part, biographer Chernow says he was initially skeptical that his book could be turned into a musical, much less one that uses rap as its main source of expression. But he agreed to meet with Miranda.
He came over to my house, he sat on my living room couch, he started snapping his fingers, and he sang the opening song, and I absolutely marveled at what he'd done, because I realized that he had condensed the first 40 pages of my book accurately into a 4.5-minute song.
Miranda performed that opening number at a poetry evening at the White House in 2009.
How does a bastard orphan son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence impoverished and squalor grow up to be a hero and a scholar? The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a self-starter.
Anyway, we played a nice chunk of that, and you have to realize that as I was doing this, I didn't have audio from the show. They had like 1 or 2 clips that I could use, so I had to kind of go back and snag the audio from the PBS special when he was there. But it illustrated the point. There's one last piece that I want to play, and often what I try to use with music is to make it kind of a propulsive storytelling device. For instance, NPR gave me all of 7 minutes to tell the entire story of Leonard Bernstein's life for his centennial this summer, which was insane. So I thought, well, how do you kind of give a sense of what that guy was like and how productive he was, especially in the early part of his life? And I thought, let's create kind of a musical cascade of little bits and pieces that kind of flow. And luckily, there was also audio extant from his very first concert with the New York Philharmonic, which is the concert that made his name in 1943. So I thought, well, if we zoom in on this particular moment in his life, then we can go on and find the other moments. So this is kind of using the music in a propulsive way.
Tomorrow marks the 100-year anniversary of Leonard Bernstein's birth. Bernstein was an extraordinary American talent. He was one of the greatest orchestra conductors of his generation. He also composed symphonies, ballets, and hit musicals like West Side Story. He was a teacher, a television personality, and a complicated man with a complicated personal life. Jeff Lunden has this appreciation.
If there was one moment when Leonard Bernstein became Leonard Bernstein, at at least to the general public, it was on November 14th, 1943.
United States Rubber Company again invites you to Carnegie Hall to hear a concert of the New York Philharmonic Symphony Orchestra.
The concert's conductor, Bruno Walter, called in sick.
And his place will be taken by the young American-born assistant conductor of the Philharmonic Symphony, Leonard Bernstein.
Leonard Bernstein was just 25 years old. Jamie Bernstein is his firstborn daughter.
When my father climbed up on that podium in Carnegie Hall and conducted the New York Philharmonic on a national radio broadcast that Sunday afternoon, that was front-page news the next day. Like local boy makes good.
And in just the following year alone, Bernstein premiered his first symphony, Jeremiah. His first ballet, Fancy Free. And his first Broadway musical, On the Town. Leonard Bernstein grew up outside.
And now we're in it. Now we're in Leonard Bernstein's life, and we can kind of go wherever we want to go.
You took that about 90 seconds, right? You launched us into his...
Yeah, 90 seconds, including about 20 to 25 seconds of the host intro, which is we've been taught that what you have to do is write the host intro. Very often they rewrite the host intro for you, but to get sort of the thesis of the story, because people are. One of the things I have to say about radio is it's a very intimate medium. You wake up to radio. Some people take showers with the radio. You're chopping your vegetables and preparing meals. You're even, driving your car. In a way that like television isn't, And actually, one of the things that you try to do as a radio producer is create what we refer to as driveway moments, where people are kind of in their cars, but they're so compelled by what it is you're writing that you get to your destination and you just stay in the car and you wait till the end of the story. And that's another thing that's a little bit different about radio from print journalism. I'm sure you guys have all heard about the inverted pyramid and the who, what, when, where, why, which you have to do in radio, but you are trying to build a kind of compelling narrative that builds you to the end. If you've got a really great quote at the end or a great piece of music to play that illustrates the point at the end, it's really that you try to create that kind of through line in it. I guess I have just a couple of challenges. One of the big challenges that I'm dealing with now is time constraints. When I started, I could get 12 and a half minutes to do a piece on All Things Considered. That was the arts slot on All Things Considered. Now if I get 5 minutes, I'm happy. And sometimes they ask, can you make it 3 minutes, 3.5, 4 minutes, which you have to essentially do the same amount of work, the same amount of interviewing people and culling through the material, whether you're doing a longer piece or a shorter piece. But the reason is we're living in a very different time of news cycles. And so one of the things that the arts desk at NPR has been struggling with quite a bit over the last 2 years is the fact that tweets happen all the time, and the news cycle is very volatile, and sometimes arts is considered less essential. So there are a lot of times when there's a backlog of art stories, and they go, oh, sorry, we can't run it tonight. We'll try and run it tomorrow night. And then something else happens. It's like, well, we'll try to run it the next night. So if you have a shorter story, then there's an opportunity to kind of move it to another slot in the show. But that's frustrating to deal with. And also the fact that I've chosen to be a freelancer as opposed to being a staff person means that I'm, hustling for jobs. But the positive part of it is that I'm covering the stuff that I really care about. That's just a little bit. I'm sure you guys have lots of questions.
I just got a couple questions. More comments actually than questions. But what I notice about your career, I think Jeff, I'm speaking of the journalists here, but this I think is true for artists as well. Three things that jump out to me about your career. A, you predicated your life on your passion, right? You followed your passion and you built a job out of that. You built something out of something that was in you that you were relentlessly curious about. The other thing is you noticed what wasn't there and you filled the need, right? You saw that not a lot of arts coverage, particularly in radio, and you were gonna do that. And the third thing is you just showed up, right? You showed up at the radio station in college, and you made that phone call as soon as you saw that article in the New York Times about the writing program at NYU, and you didn't let opportunity pass you by when you went to the 92nd Street Y and you let peace there. So by just following your passion and showing up and looking for what isn't there, you can build an entire career out of that, you know, and I think that's really good. It's easy to sit here and listen to the condensed and compressed version of all of it. Talk to us a little bit about, is this something that just kind of evolved into, or you said, you know what, I'm going to keep my hand in musical composition and then I'm going to pay the bills with my journalism? How did that work?
Well, I have to say, for many years, I refused to take a job that would kind of keep me from composing.
Right.
So I was telemarketing. I was waiting even through grad school, I was waiting tables. I was taking lots of little jobs, and I would every year do 1 or 2 documentaries as I was composing because I really loved it. And I really loved just kind of sitting. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of John Raitt, who was the original...
Bonnie Raitt's father.
Yeah, Bonnie Raitt's dad, who was in the original Carousel. He was Billy Bigelow. And, I just sat in his backyard while he was drinking a beer, and he was telling me all about working with Rodgers and Hammerstein on Carousel, and how the very first time he got the soliloquy, which is the big number for Billy Bigelow, he was like, he just opens up this accordion bolt. He's going, oh my God, how many pages do I have to do? But that was incredible fun for me. So I was doing all of that. And then there just came a point, and it was around 2000 when I was doing the NPR 100, right? I was doing theater, I was doing a lot of stuff, a lot of children's theater for years and years. And there were just a couple of projects that sort of went south. And all of a sudden the radio stuff, the doors were opening for me. And I thought, well, why not, you know? And it's not that I've stopped writing, because I'm still writing, but it's not as primary focus, because I love the job.
It's terrific. Let's throw it over to these guys and have them ask some questions.
You mentioned that you had 6+ hours of raw audio from the Sing Sing piece. Are you noting down different quotes or sound bites that you want to use in the piece and going back to it, or when you get home, you're calling through all 6 hours?
Both. I have a couple of digital audio recorders that I can just press a button and it'll put a mark. So very often, if I'm interviewing something, or if I hear something that I think might be useful, I'll put the mark in. And the recorder works in such a way that I just hook it up to my computer and I slurp it in. It's read as an external drive, and I get WAV files. But in the last year, I've been using a service called Trint, which is it's a British service, and you essentially take the audio. This is purely for interviews. Upload it, and within about 5 minutes, I would say you have uploaded a half-an-hour interview, and you get a transcript back, and you're able to kind of go through the transcript, edit it. It's a lot like Siri, which means it gets a lot of words wrong, especially if you're talking about some very specific kinds theatrical terms or people or whatever. Actually, I have a friend, we send each other our the funniest print mistakes. But you can highlight the audio, you can highlight the transcription, drag it into a Word file, and it lets me know literally the second where it starts and when it ends, so that I can then go back to the audio and do a fine edit on the audio, which I do all on my computer. So yeah, the answer is both. I kind of, as I'm doing the interview, I'm thinking about, oh, this would be good. This might be good. In a piece like Sing Sing, you don't necessarily know until you go there what the story is. I'm working now on a piece about this play called The Ferryman that's on Broadway. And that was much more, I kind of knew a little bit. I knew what the show was. I knew the questions that I was going to ask the playwright about his approach to the play. So with that, I think I have a better idea as I'm going in how the piece may turn out. But you never know. You might get a great interview segment that you never expected, and you kind of go with it. And that's one thing that I'd like to say. I mean, the guy that I trained with, he once told me, he said, I never go into an interview without knowing all the answers. And I was like, really? And I used to be, I mean, I do prepare before I go to an interview. I'll read whatever stuff is out there online about, the Ferryman, this particular playwright. But I think the most important thing when you're doing an interview is just to listen. And if they say something, follow up with it. See where it's going to take you. Because to me, those surprises are sometimes the best thing. Very often, I find that when I turn off the microphone and I'm starting to put my equipment away and I'm talking with somebody, we'll just start talking about something and I'm like, do you mind if I turn the mic back on? Can we talk about that? That happens all the time.
So, I'm wondering about your attitude to not take any jobs that took you away from composing at first. Because I'm a theater performance major and a journalism minor. I really love radio, grew up on NPR. And I guess my thing is I'm very passionate about a lot of stuff, but all of those things need a lot of attention. And do you think that helped that for you, or helped you when you had this attitude of I'm not going to do anything other than composing?
That's a good question. I mean, I was pretty focused on that. But there was this other thing that I really enjoyed. I would be doing a documentary and it would be like maybe 2 to 3 months out of my life of really concentrated effort. So it didn't really get in the way necessarily of the composing. But at a certain point, the opportunity arose and I realized I enjoyed it. I got a great compliment once from another person who works at NPR who also had a theater background. She said, the reason I like your stories is because you know how the sausage is made. And that, I really think that actually helps when I sit, say, in a green room or a dressing room talking to an actor or talking to a director, going, I noticed that you did blah, blah, blah here and blah, blah, blah there. And they don't expect to get that usually because general assignment reporters don't necessarily have that kind of background. So, has the journalism gotten in the way of my composing? Yeah, to a certain degree it has. So I try to find silos. But you know, if you find a passion, you know, don't close the door. You know, you never know what's going to happen.
Questions?
Yeah. I would say that it used to be mixing a piece, and that has changed a little bit. The main editor that I'm working with now, that's his favorite part of the process. So I kind of pre-mix with him. I go, you know, here's what I think should be the post point where we should bring the music up, and here's where it should go down. And of course, you're always, with radio, you're always dealing with the clock. You know, there's a certain fudge factor, but not a lot. You know, if a piece needs to be 4.5 minutes, then you have to kind of look at it. I mean, the advantage now is that it's all digital. I mean, it used to be all analog. And up until, I don't know, 2004, 2005, I was bringing in large reels, and I was mixing stuff live with engineers and editing the tape together. Now you can just kind of look at it and see, oh, we've got to lose 20 seconds, so how are we going to do that? But I love that. I love creating that ebb and flow, especially, you know, if you cross-fading from one music or sound to another to give those pivot points. Calling tape is really hard.
Just for the folks who aren't journalists, can you talk a little bit about your composing and what you're working on now as far as that's concerned, and maybe a little bit of background?
Sure. So yeah, I've been writing musicals since junior high school, and I had a show that was done at the Goodman Theater in the Public Theater 25 years ago called Wings, which was based on this play by Arthur Kopit, which was all about a woman who has a stroke. So it's not a typical musical, and she gets aphasia, and it's all about how she kind of finds language. She loses her ability with language, and it was a piece that kind of dealt with, as a composer, I used electronic instruments and acoustic instruments to create this sort of fractured world. And in the first half of the piece, there are a lot of fragments, and as the piece went on, it kind of, and as she improved, it kind of cohered more. But I wrote a version of Midsummer Night's Dream called Another Midsummer Night, set in contemporary New York with 400-year-old fairies who speak and sing in verse, interacting with the bottom in this thing is a performance artist who gets stuck in her video monitor. And I'm working now on a show called Swift as Desire, which is based on a novel, a short novel by Laura Esquivel, who wrote Like Water for Chocolate. And it's about the last telegraph operator in Mexico. And so we actually have a song in Morse code. And it's got I would say, a Latin-inflected score. And we've had a couple of readings of that in Chicago. We're hoping to get a production next year, so we'll see.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Can you talk about a moment where you're working on a project and you weren't able to get all the pieces together, but a challenge that you have to overcome?
Yes. I actually just did a piece on Harry Potter, the big 5.5-hour Harry Potter that's being done on Broadway. And when you leave the theater, there's this thing that says #keep the secrets. And they refused to record any of the scenes from the play because they didn't want to let anybody know basically what was going on in the play. You know, so I could interview the people, but they could only speak about the plot in the very broadest terms. They would give me some of the music that had been written for the piece, but they wouldn't give me any scenes. So here I have to do a thing, and I mean, this is one that the shows were very interested in because Harry Potter, it's an enormous phenomenon. So how do you tell a story when you can't play it and illustrate anything for the story? So I dealt with the fact that they were keeping everything secret, the hashtag keep the secrets. I even had an interview with a guy who plays the older Harry Potter in the show saying I had to sign a confidentiality agreement when I was doing this. And I thought, how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I express this? I said, I'm going to stand outside the theater after the show and find some kid. And it was great! You know, because they were talking about, the director was talking about, oh, you know, the great thing about this show is that we, you know, yes, we have these magic effects, but, you know, a lot of them a little kid could do in their house, you know, using cloaks and suitcases and whatever. So I found this little 10-year-old kid with his mom. It was the first show he'd ever seen. I swear to God, he was out of Central Casting. He was from New Jersey. Cute kid. And he said, yeah, I've read all of the books and I've seen all of the movies and I loved how they used the suitcases and the cloaks that he was wearing a cloak himself. And I thought, that's it. So I started the piece with the little kid, and the little kid had the final word. And that gave you at least a sense of the appeal and the mystery of the thing. But, oh my God, you know, to take the assignment and have everybody go, we want it, we want it, we want it. And it's like, yeah, well, you can't get a piece of dialogue. No way.
You know, rough magic.
Right, yeah, I think that's what
so that story was sort of emblematic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any other musical radio shows that you listen to regularly that you enjoy broadcasts?
I don't know if there are
Any podcasts?
I mean, there are one or two podcasts out there that I haven't been listening to. Mainly, gotta be honest with you, in this day and age, I'm listening to NPR Politics podcast and Pod Save America and a lot of stuff like that. At the moment, that's really what I'm doing. I don't think there are a whole lot of outlets. For a while, Playbill online had a podcast, but I don't think they're doing it.
Or radio shows?
I don't think there are a lot of regular radio shows out
It's an
there.
opportunity for you, right there.
Yeah, I mean, there might be some guy actually on WBAI who's doing something.
I know one called, it's called Performance Today that I just enjoy so much. And
Oh, Performance Today.
yeah.
Yeah, but that's basically classical music performances. Yeah. I don't really think there is a weekly radio show that deals with theater. So, go for it. And BAI was great. I mean, the thing that was amazing to me was, and it was just, you know, terrible, filthy facility, and, you know, what?
Zero money.
Yeah, it was zero money, but my God, you know, when I actually started working in public radio, so many of the reporters had started out their careers doing stuff at BAI because it just gave them the opportunity to do things. The other thing I should say for all the journalism students here who are interested, NPR does have paid internships. I don't think they pay a lot. They pay something. And for as long as I've been filing stories for the Arts Desk, there have been interns there, and practically every one of those interns has gotten hired. hired by NPR as a reporter, as a producer for NPR Music. It's a great thing to check out if you're interested in radio.
Brendan?
Kind of a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Do you feel that like the popularization of podcasts elevated quality or kind of drowned out quality of content?
I think it's a little bit of the Wild West at the moment. You know, you hear some of these incredibly well-produced podcasts, like Serial and S-Town and stuff like that, which actually come out of like This American Life. And there's a lot of, you know, people just kind of talking, and not a whole lot of editing or editorial or curatorial approach to it. So I think there's a great, I mean, if I was starting out in radio now, I would be looking at podcasting. Because when I was starting out, it was sort of content dictated how long something was going to be. So if it wanted to be 12 and a half minutes to fill that art slot, that's how long it was. But if it was an 8-minute story, it was an 8-minute story. Whereas with podcast, you know, you can, if it wants to be 23 minutes, it's 23 minutes and nobody's going to complain about the length because you don't have to meet, you know, at 20 minutes after the hour, there's news, or you have to put in ID at a certain point. So I think podcasting is absolutely the future. There are problems. I mean, I actually did approach Audible about doing a weekly arts program. And they said, that sounds fantastic. We'd love to do it. The problem is we are a commercial entity. And so fair use doesn't apply. And because fair use doesn't apply, any clip, musical clip, piece of dialogue or whatever, we have to pay for it. And we're just not in a position where we can do something like that. So, you know, they have a lot of money to produce podcasts, and I don't entirely know how that's going. They've got a subscription service, and they're producing podcasts. But for the kind of journalistic stuff, if you're going on a commercial level, there are some problems with rights that you have to deal with. But I think it's the future. Yeah.
So you mentioned the time constraints for all things considered, and it's getting more difficult to get content on there. What about arts journalism is worth spreading and working on to you? What about arts journalism makes it worth working on and sharing to you?
I think it's a way to impart the human condition to people. And I think it's actually more important now than maybe when I started, given the kind of brutality of the news and the news cycles. I think people are hungry for stuff like that. NPR, to its credit, they changed what we refer to as the clock for morning edition. At a certain point, the clock was changed to, at the very top of the hour, you heard a newscast. Then it went to 20 minutes after the hour, and you heard a truncated newscast. Then it went to 40 minutes after the hour, and you heard a truncated newscast. And then you went around. And generally speaking, the last 7.5 minutes used to be arts in morning edition, but that kind of stopped. So people were complaining to NPR that the stuff that they were hearing at the end of the hour was the stuff that they were hearing at the top of the hour in the newscast, was the stuff that they were hearing after you got out of the newscast. And so, I don't know, maybe half a year ago, they changed it back so that the newscast is on the hour and on the half hour, which leaves a little more time for slightly longer stories. But, I think art stories, especially art stories that talk about the human condition or the transformative power of art. I think that's why every year I try to do at least one story like the prison story or an education story or something that shows how important the arts are to, people's development, people's perception. I'm obviously keeping my eye out, my ears out for things that I think will be relevant. A friend of mine, I was visiting her in Arizona, and she subscribes to the New Yorker. And I said, well, oh, wow, what do you read in the New Yorker? She said, the first thing I do is I go to the back of the magazine, and I read all the reviews. And I said, well, here you are in Arizona, like you come to New York once a decade. She says, oh, I don't care. I just want to know like what's happening in the theater and what's happening with dance and what's happening with music. And I thought, oh my God, that is like the definition of my job. My job is 99.9% of the people who listen to the stories that I do on NPR are never going to see the show. I mean, if it's a Broadway show, yeah, they might come to New York, and if they're interested in it, they might try and see it. Or 2 years later, if it comes to, Arizona, they might try and see the tour. But most of the time, it's just about, what are artists thinking about? What are they trying to say? And in what... and so that's... I probably go to the theater or concerts 5 or 6 nights a week. Because yes, Sako gets to come in once in a while. Because I'm prospecting for stories. I'm a little bit like a casting director in that respect. It's like, oh, is this a playwright who's really interesting, who has something to say? And it may be that I don't think that particular play is all that good, but it's like, I want to see what that playwright's doing next time. And it's really fun if you do a profile of a young playwright and then you find out that they won the MacArthur Award. It's like, yeah. So that's a joy. Yeah.
There have been stories that you started and were interested in, but then realized that the public probably wasn't that interested in when you were taught it. Easily you kind of went, oh, I'm just going to stop with this.
Not really. I mean, usually if I've committed to a story, I'm committed to bringing it to completion. There have been 1 or 2 unfortunate times where I've finished a story and it just hasn't, it just got, bumped to the point where it was no longer relevant, and so they paid me a kill fee on it. But by and large, yeah, I kind of follow through on it. Because you can always find something. I mean, I'm going to do a story about King Kong, which I'll be honest with you, personally, is not something that I'm particularly interested in as a show on Broadway, but the show's been selling out. And I think that for one thing, Morning Edition is very interested in having a story about it. So I'm trying to figure out what the best approach to it is. Is it a commercial story? Is it about the fact that this Australian producer spent $35 million to bring this giant puppet of King Kong to New York that has to be operated by 12 people? Or is the story about the 12 people who operate the giant puppet? And I actually was going to have a conversation with my editor today about that, to try and figure out what we were going to do, but he was crashing on another story, so we pushed it off. But usually there's something that you can find, there's a way that you can find into it. And that puppet is fascinating.
You've seen it?
Yeah, the way it works and the way
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.